What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you 5 of my favorite phones you can use with Metro in 2022. Now before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about any of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about each of them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get into it. So coming in at number 1, we got one of the most inexpensive devices you can get without sacrificing quality, and that is the Motorola Moto G Pure. Now of course, being a really entry-level device, this phone is really not great at anything, but for what it is, it's really well-rounded and pretty decent at everything considering its price range. So with this phone, we're getting a 6.5-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 270, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 80.6% screen-to-body ratio. So while not being the most amazing display, especially compared to lots of the other phones in this video, the Moto G Pure definitely does have a decent display with a pretty good image despite only being 720p, and at 6.5 inches, it's definitely large enough to give you a decent experience when you're doing something like streaming videos. For storage, we're getting 32GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, making it unfortunately the lowest amount of storage in this entire video. But that being said, again, keep in mind, this is a really entry-level phone, and most of the time you are going to get this phone for under $100, so it's really meant for people who are only going to be using their phone for more basic activities anyway. But that being said, despite only having 32GB of internal storage, the microSD card expansion definitely helps out a lot. So if you have a lot of photos and videos, for example, you can always offload those onto a microSD card, and that's going to save you a lot of space. Now for security features, this phone does have a fingerprint scanner and face unlock as well, so considering its price range, it definitely is nice to see we have both here. The fingerprint scanner is located right here on the back, so let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, works real well, no issues at all. And again, there is face unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a dual camera setup with a 13 megapixel main camera and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So as far as the camera goes, that's one of the least impressive things about this phone. And really, if you're taking a lot of pictures and the camera is a priority for you, most of the other phones in this video are going to be quite a bit better. But again, for more casual users, which is really who this phone is meant for, you will probably be okay, because while not being the best, the camera really isn't terrible. So if you just want to get the occasional photo here and there, maybe for something like Snapchat for example, where the quality isn't super important, in that kind of situation, the Moto G Pure will at least get the job done. Now as far as RAM and processor go, with the Moto G Pure, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G25 processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on it, and it came back with a single core score of 133 and a multi-core score of 476. So again, this is really not the fastest phone out there. It's really just made for light activities like web browsing, maybe a little bit of social media and stuff like that. But if you're doing more complex activities like mobile gaming for example, or you're just going to be on your phone a lot, you're probably going to want to get a faster device, because as far as performance goes, this is really not the Moto G Pure's strong suit. But that being said, again, for more casual users, if you're really not doing a whole lot with it and you just need a phone for basic activities, then it will absolutely get the job done. And in my experience, despite the phone not being very fast, I haven't had any performance issues with it. Now for the battery, this phone has a 4000 mAh battery that supports 10-watt fast charging, so just like pretty much everything with this phone, while it's not the best battery out there, it definitely will get the job done. Sure, it's not going to endure heavy use for multiple days or anything, but it definitely will get you through the day, and with 10-watt fast charging, that's going to save you some time too. Now another thing to keep in mind about this phone is it does not have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, keep in mind you're not going to be able to do that with this phone. Up next, we got the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE. This phone is actually pretty similar to the Moto G Pure in a lot of ways, being a pretty entry-level phone that's pretty affordable, and along with being a little bit more expensive than the Moto G Pure, it also has some significantly better features. So with this phone, we're getting a 6.6-inch PLS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 400, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 83.2% screen-to-body ratio. So for the display, the thing that really sticks out about this phone in this price range is the 1080p resolution. Now of course, a 1080p resolution isn't really unique in and of itself, but having it on such an entry-level phone is definitely a real nice thing to see. So if you're consuming a lot of content, like watching videos, playing games, looking at photos and that kind of thing, and you still want to stay within a fairly entry-level price point, the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE is going to be a great choice. Now for storage, this phone is getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. So again, while still being an entry-level phone like the Moto G Pure, the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE does have a more reasonable amount of storage. So for the average user, while 64GB is still nothing crazy, it's definitely going to be quite a bit better than 32. And again, there is microSD card expansion here, and this is great if if you want to offload stuff like photos and videos. Now for security features, this phone does have face unlock and a fingerprint scanner. The fingerprint scanner is right here on the power key, definitely a real convenient spot for it, so let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, there is face unlock, giving us 2 different ways to unlock it besides a pin. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So as far as the camera goes, despite being a really affordable phone, the Samsung Galaxy A13 actually has a really good camera setup, both in terms of features, having an ultra wide camera and a macro camera, and photo quality as well. So if you do want a really affordable phone, but you like to take a lot of pictures, then the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE is going to be a great choice. Now as far as RAM and processor go, with the Samsung Galaxy A13, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Exynos 850 processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone as well, and it came back with a single core score of 155 and a multi-core score of 572. So performance wise, this phone is going to be a little bit faster than the Moto G Pure, but still not really very fast. So if you're really going to be on your phone a lot, or again, if you're doing stuff that needs a little bit more processing power like mobile gaming for example, you're probably going to want a faster phone than this. But if you're just doing really basic activities, then again, despite not being a very fast phone, it still will get the job done. Now the battery is another area where this phone really gives you a lot of value for the money, with a 5000 mAh battery supporting 15-watt fast charging. So with a 5000 mAh battery, you're going to get great battery life and longevity, and 15-watt fast charging, while not being the best fast charging out there, is still definitely good, and I can say from experience, the charging speed on this phone is not bad at all. Now when it comes to NFC, this specific phone in my hand doesn't have NFC, but I do know there are some variants of the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE that do, but again, not all of them do. And again, this phone in this video is one of the ones that doesn't, so just keep in mind, while there may be some models of this phone out there that do have NFC, if you really want that feature, then I would definitely recommend checking to make sure it has that feature, because again, for whatever reason, not every version of this phone has it. But overall, if you're doing more basic activities for the most part, but you're consuming a lot of content, you want a good camera, and you want a phone with a great battery, the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE is going to be a great choice. And up next, we got the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G. Now, as the name suggests, this is literally the 5G variant of the Samsung Galaxy A13, but surprisingly, there are lots of differences between this phone and the A13 LTE besides just 5G connectivity. I would say the best use for this phone is if you want a 5G phone, you want a little bit better performance, but you still want something that's relatively affordable. So that being said, with this phone for the display, we got a 6.5-inch 90Hz PLS TFT display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 270, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 81.1% screen to body ratio. So along with the Moto G Pure, this is one of the only phones in this video that has a 720p resolution, which honestly is just too bad, because seeing that this phone is the 5G version, you would think that it would be a little bit better than the A13 LTE, but that's really not the case here, at least not for the display. But that being said, one nice thing about this display is it does have a 90Hz refresh rate, and that's going to make the movement on the screen a little bit faster and smoother. And while you probably can't tell here, when you're actually using the phone for stuff like videos for example, where there's a lot of motion on the screen, everything is going to feel a little bit faster and more fluid, so you are going to get a better experience in that regard. And in addition to this, with a 90Hz refresh rate, when you're just using the phone overall, it's going to feel a little bit more premium. But that being said, it's still kind of disappointing that this phone still only has a 720p display instead of 1080p, seeing that the 4G version does actually have 1080p. And honestly, because of that, while this phone isn't going to be bad for stuff like watching videos, playing games, and that kind of thing, it's probably not going to be the best choice for that. Now for storage, just like the LTE version, the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G is getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. So again, not really anything special here, but for a more entry-level phone, it's at least acceptable. For security features, we got the same side-mounted fingerprint scanner, so again, definitely a nice spot for it. Let's go ahead and give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, it worked pretty well. And then just like the 4G variant, this phone does have face unlock as well. So if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setup, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So overall, the camera setup is pretty good, but it's actually not quite as good as the 4G variant, since that one does have an ultra wide camera and this one doesn't. So if taking a lot of photos is a priority for you, then I would suggest either getting the Samsung Galaxy A13 4G, which does have an ultra wide camera, or if you still want 5G connectivity and better performance, maybe getting a slightly higher end device with a better camera. But that being said, for more casual use, maybe you don't really care about the ultra-wide camera, and you just like to get a few nice regular pictures every now and then, while still not being the best, the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G will at least get the job done. Now as far as RAM and processor go, with this phone we're getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor. On Geekbench 5, we're getting a single core score of 460 and a multi-core score of 1099. So as you can see here, compared to the Moto GPU and the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE, the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G is quite a bit more powerful. But that being said, while it may be an improvement from some of the really low-end phones, it's still nowhere near as fast as a lot of other 5G phones, so I still wouldn't recommend this phone for really heavy users if you're doing more high-performance mobile gaming, for example, or you're just going to be on your phone all the time. Again, this is probably not going to be the best option for that kind of situation, but if you are still using your phone for more basic activities, and maybe you just want 5G connectivity and a little bit more power than your average entry-level phone, the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G will be a good choice in that situation. Now for the battery, the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15W fast charging, so another real good battery here. It'll have great life and longevity, and the charging speeds are not bad either. And another really cool thing about this phone is it does actually have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, you can actually do that with the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G. So in general, the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G is a really well-rounded phone that, like the Moto G Pure, is really not great at anything, but it is pretty good at everything. It has decent performance, an okay display and camera, a really good battery, and it has features like 5G connectivity and NFC, all while still being at a pretty reasonable entry-level price. Up next, we got the TCL Stylus 5G. Now this is where you start to really get into the mid-range, still nothing crazy, but definitely a significant improvements in performance and features compared to a more entry-level phone like the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G. And of course, as the name of this phone suggests, one of the more unique features about it is the stylus, but honestly, this phone is so good that sometimes I forget the stylus is even there, because there's so much more to it than that. Now with that being said, with this phone, we're getting a 6.81-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 395, an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, and a 90.2% screen to body ratio. So the first thing you probably noticed about this phone is that it has a really large display, and this is going to be great for consuming content. In fact, I would say this is one of the best phones in this entire video if you're really just watching a lot of videos, playing lots of games and that kind of stuff, because having such a large display combined with a 1080p resolution is really going to give you a great experience. In addition to this, with an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, we're getting a really tall and narrow form factor here. In fact, this is the only phone in this video that has these kind of dimensions. And with a more tall and narrow form factor, you're going to get a more immersive experience in landscape mode. And if you're doing something vertical like scrolling through social media or reading an article, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. So in general, if you're consuming a lot of content and you want a phone with a great display, the TCL Stylus 5G is really one of the best options for a mid-range phone. Now for storage, this phone is getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so definitely a real good amount of storage here. For the average user, this is going to be perfect. You're most likely not going to have to worry about running out of space, and with the microSD card expansion, if you have stuff like photos and videos, you can always offload those onto a microSD card and get even more space for apps. For security features, like every phone in this video, we got both a fingerprint scanner and face unlock. The fingerprint scanner is right here on the power key. Let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, the fingerprint scanner worked real well, no issues at all. Now for the camera setup, we got a hole punch design for the front facing camera. This camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So as far as camera features go, the TCL Stylus 5G is great. It has pretty much everything, including an ultra wide camera and a macro camera. So if you're taking a lot of photos, this is definitely going to come in handy. And as far as quality goes, the pictures this phone takes are really good. Sure, they're not anywhere near flagship level, but I would say compared to all these phones in this video, next to the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, which we will get to in a minute, I would say this is the second best one. So if you are taking a lot of photos and you want to make sure they're really good quality, the TCL Stylus 5G is going to be a great choice. Now speaking of the camera, keep in mind I have done full camera reviews of almost every phone in this video, so if you do want to learn more about the camera quality itself and see some sample photos, I will be linking to all of them in the description, so if you're interested, definitely check that out. Now for the RAM and processor, the TCL Stylus 5G is getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor. On Geekbench 5, we're getting a single core score of 560 and a multi-core score of 1755. So out of this group, this is definitely one of the faster phones, and while it's still not going to be anywhere near flagship level, if you're doing stuff like mobile gaming, or if you're just going to be on your phone a lot, the TCL Stylus 5G is going to give you a great experience. Now that being said, keep in mind, if you're doing something like playing Call of Duty or Fortnite, that takes a lot of processing power, this phone still might not be the best for that, but again, for more moderate activities, it will handle pretty much everything else perfectly fine. For the battery, the TCL Stylus 5G has a 4000 mAh battery that supports 18-watt fast charging, so unfortunately not really the best battery, but if you're not too concerned about battery life, maybe you have a less mobile lifestyle where you can keep your phone plugged in all day, in that case you're probably not going to notice anyway, and even if you don't always have it plugged in, unless you're using it really heavily, it's at least going to last throughout the day. As far as NFC goes, as you can see by the icon right here, the TCL Stylus 5G does actually have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, you can do that with this phone. And last but not least, again, as the name suggests, this phone does have a stylus, making it one of the few non-flagship phones that does. As far as the actual quality goes, it's not the best stylus in the world, and don't expect to be able to do any actual art on it, but if you just like to take handwritten notes and stuff like that, maybe play a game or navigate through the phone, it will at least get the job done. And after all, it is one of the few mid-range phones that has a stylus, so I can't really complain too much. But overall, if you're looking for a phone with real solid performance, a great display, a good camera setup that takes great photos, and some nice features like NFC and a stylus, the TCL Stylus 5G is going to be a great option for you. And last but not least, in fact probably the complete opposite for that matter, we got the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. Now this phone is pretty much the ultimate mid-range phone with great performance, a great display, and honestly, unless you compare it to something like an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, this phone is pretty much great at everything. So with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, we're getting a 6.5-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 405, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 85.4% screen-to-body ratio. So with this phone, at 6.5 inches, we are getting a decently large display here, and with an AMOLED display, the image is going to look great, really bold, vibrant colors, great brightness, and the viewing angles are really good as well. In fact, compared to literally any other phone in this video, like for example the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G, or even the TCL Stylus 5G, which I did consider to be really good as well, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is a lot easier to see, so if you're outside in the sun for example, this is definitely going to make a huge difference. And with a 120Hz refresh rate, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G has the highest refresh rate of all these phones, so the movement on the screen is going to be real fast and fluid. So if you're doing stuff like watching videos, playing games, that kind of stuff, you're going to get a great experience there, and if you're just using the phone in general, it will feel pretty premium. So overall, if you're looking for a phone with a great display and you're consuming a lot of content, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is going to be one of the best options in this price range. For storage, this phone is getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, but keep in mind there is another variant that has 256, so if you're really a power user and you need even more storage, you can get even more than this phone has. But that being said, again, 128GB is going to be plenty of storage for most people, and there is microSD card expansion as well, so you can always offload stuff like photos and videos. For security features, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G does have a fingerprint scanner and face unlock, and with this phone, the fingerprint scanner is right here in the display. So let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, like all the others, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And I personally like the in-display fingerprint scanner the best. It looks so much nicer and more premium, and definitely goes with the look of the phone. For the camera setup here, we're getting a 32 megapixel front-facing camera. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 64 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra-wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, as you can see from my full camera review of this phone, has pretty much the best camera of all of these phones. In addition to having both a macro camera and an ultra-wide camera, and taking really high-quality, professional-looking photos, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G can also record in 4K at 30 frames per second in both the rear and front cameras, making it the only phone in this video that can record in 4K. So if you are taking a lot of photos and recording a lot of videos, and you want the best quality you can get in a mid-range phone, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is going to be one of your best options. Now for the RAM and processor, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is getting 6GB of RAM with the Samsung Exynos 1280 processor. Now keep in mind there's another version of this phone that has 8GB of RAM, but this phone in my hand is the 6GB version. But that being said, like all the others, I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on it, and it came back with a single core score of 742 and a multi-core score of 1910. So this is a really fast phone, especially for just being a mid-range phone, and while it's still not nearly as fast as a flagship phone, there's really not a whole lot you can't do at all with it. Sure, if you're doing stuff like playing Call of Duty or Fortnite or any of those really high-end games, it might not run the best if you max out the graphics, but honestly it can play that kind of stuff perfectly fine. So even if you are doing stuff like mobile gaming, the A53 5G will handle that kind of thing perfectly fine. And in addition to this, of course, if you're doing more basic activities like web browsing, social media, that kind of thing, while the other phones in this video obviously can do that stuff too, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G compared to the others is going to be noticeably faster. So in general, if performance is really a priority for you, this phone is really going to be a great choice. Now the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 25-watt fast charging. So this phone is not only going to get great battery life and longevity, but if you have a 25-watt fast charger charger, it's going to charge up in no time, and I can tell you from experience, the charging speeds on this phone are really good. So if you are in a situation where you don't always have a lot of time to charge your phone, then definitely keep this in mind. In addition to this, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G does have NFC, so if you like to use contactless mobile payment services, then you'll be happy to know you can do that with this phone. Now, all that being said, while I really do like this phone a lot, one not so good thing about it I do want to point out is that it doesn't have a headphone jack. And in fact, that makes it the only phone in this entire video that doesn't have a headphone jack. So if you do have a normal pair of 3.5mm headphones you want to use, keep in mind that to use them on this phone, you will have to get an adapter. But other than that, for a mid-range phone, if you want a phone that's really good at everything and not bad at anything, then the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is going to be a great choice for you. But those were 5 of my favorite phones you can use with Metro in 2022. In general, to sum it all up, if you want the cheapest option you can get without it being terrible, then the Motorola Moto G Pure, being a decent, well-rounded device that can easily handle really basic use, but also is really inexpensive, is going to be a great choice for you. If you still want a really affordable phone, but you want a good display for consuming content, a nice camera setup, and a really good battery, then you're most likely really going to like the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE. On the other hand, if you want an entry-level 5G phone with a little bit more processing power than your average entry-level phone that may not be great at anything, but is at least pretty decent at everything, then the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G is going to be a great choice for you. On the other hand, if you want a true mid-range phone with a really large, high-quality display, a good amount of storage, a good camera setup, great performance, and some nice features like NFC and a stylus, then the TCL Stylus 5G might be a good option for you. And again, finally, if you want what's pretty much the ultimate mid-range phone that's essentially going to be great at everything, and you don't mind paying a little bit more and not having a headphone jack, then you really can't go wrong with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. Now again, if you want to learn more about any of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability, because this is always changing. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Khalipa's Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next video.